Hello my friends and welcome back to my painting channel, and today we're going to be trying to mix up a few different power swords. So I'm going to try and use a little bit of a blend-in technique, and we're going to make some of these really cool looking sort of blue power swords. So for this I'm using a mixture of bellow paints with an AK paint at the end as well. So we're going from an imperial blue, medium blue and a pastel blue from bellow, and then using a really light pastel blue from AK. And what I'm doing is I'm putting these paints into my wet palette, as you can see, and I've mixed them right from the darkest all the way up to the lightest. So I've put the four colours in and I've blended these colours together into the wet palette. So that these are sort of wet, really free-flowing paints, so that we can mix those together and get some nice glazes and things. So this is a little bit different from doing like the non-metallic metal, because with the non-metallic metals that we did the other day, you start in with the darkest colour. Well, with a power sword you don't do that. It's a little bit different because you start with the middle colour first. So for this we start in with the medium blue colour, and we're going to build those colours, and we're going to use the sort of wet palette to kind of blend those colours together. So once we've got our middle colour, so our base coat down, we're then going to use the very edge of the brush and we're going to mix in the darkest colour. And to mix in the darkest colour, as you can see, I'm mixing this into 4 stages across the sword. So I'm doing one just at the tip, one on the opposite side, then on the opposite side, and then down towards the hilt as well. So we're just mixing these colours together, and we're just putting this into like these 4 little stages. So we've got these little clumps either side of the blade, as you can see. Now this is the darkest colour, so we're just using the darkest colour to build where we're going to put the shades, and we're going to blend those tones and blend those colours together. So as you can see, you're just trying to keep these colours a little bit separate from that mid-tone. And I'm putting a couple of layers on as well. Doesn't matter if you use the paints in this when the paints are wet. The whole idea is that we're going to wet blend and mix those colours together as much as possible. So as you can see, it's giving you a little bit of a pattern here, almost like a checked pattern down the blade of the sword. And that's exactly what we want, because we're going to mix and match and add the highlights to the opposite side. As you can see now, we're just going to use one of the lighter colours. So this is going to the bellow pastel blue, not the AK pastel blue. The AK interactive pastel blue is so bright, we're going to use that one as the edge highlighting at the end. So now that we've got the darkest colour on either side in this little check pattern, we're then going to go and put the lighter colour that we're using on the opposite sides again, so creating this really light and dark sort of opposite check pattern. Now once you've done that, you go back to the darker colour, but go to the middle point. So the darker colour, as I was saying, we're mixing those colours through. So we're using that mid-tone to dark tone, so just trying to catch as much of that blend as you can, and then kind of glazing these colours together, like so. And again, like I say, it doesn't matter if these are wet, you know, I'm not waiting much time in between for these to dry. And there's a reason for that, and that reason is these colours then are going to blend together a little bit more naturally. This is considered sort of like a wet blending kind of style and a wet blending kind of technique. And the whole idea is that these colours are going to go from the dark to the light in a nice even transition. So we're not going to have areas and parts of the sword that are really, really bright and really, really dark without them blending together. So by using these mixed colours, so the lighter colour with a little bit of the mid-tone, or the darker colour with a bit of the mid-tone, we're blending that and smoothing that through. So as you can see, I'm adding a few different layers on as well. Now I'm going to do this to 2 different swords anyway. So we're going to try and mix this up, and we're going to try and see if we can mimic this quite a lot, just to see if this is something that is easily replicated, and something that we can like make a lot of times and do. So say if you've got like an army and you need to paint a lot of magical swords, we're just going to try and see if we can mix this in quite a few different times. So now that I've done a little bit of a blend, I've just waited for that to dry a little bit now. And then I'm going to start another blend on top. So I've waited for the first layers, so the first little blended layers that I've done. So those light and dark points, I've waited for those, they've dried down a bit, so I'm not going to mimic or mess about with those too much now. That layer has dried down. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing on top. And we're just going to mix and blend those colours together again. So by the first layer drying down, that means when we mix this, the next couple of layers and the next couple of tones onto it, we're not going to end up moving or manipulating the layer underneath. As you can see, like I was saying about these little wet blends and just blending those colours together, it's almost like glazing. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to glaze, there you go, as you can see, you're trying to glaze that darker colour into that lighter colour. And this can take a few different layers, it can take a few different textures, a few different tones, and it takes a little bit of practice to kind of get the that in-between mid-tone that you want to glaze those colours through. It takes a little bit of practice just to get that as well. So this is what I've been doing lately, is just taking a few swords out of my bits box and just practicing how to do sort of this kind of technique on those swords. And that's the best thing about having a bits box, is yes, you can use them to like customize and mod your models, but they're also great little parts in your bits box that are there that you can just test new things on, try new things out, and really go for it and give yourself some new skills and some new cool different ways of painting. So as you can see now that I'm still doing this glazing, you see where those colours are really starting to blend together. See how they blend in together? A lot smoother now. That transition into the lighter colours is much smoother. So I'm just adding some more lighter points on, and as you can see, the paint is really thin. So as this is drying down, it's not going to stand out, it's not going to make too much of a jump or a boost out of the sword. There you go, see now that that's dry. Look at how nice and smooth those transitions between the light and dark are. So as I was saying earlier, we're not using that AK Interactive pastel blue. That's just going to be for the very edge highlighting, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm using a very thin fine tip brush for this, and I'm just using that really light blue. It's almost like a white blue, and the whole point with that is we're just going to use that to run that across the very edges of the sword, just to make those edges stand out as much as possible. And then using that very tip of the sword, as you can see, I'm just running the brush across the sword to create sort of like a shimmer or a shine or a gleam or little scratches, however you want to see it. And this is going to separate and create a little bit more of a texture down the sword for your eye to look at. So instead of just looking at that really cool blend that we've made using those blue colours, we're also using this really extreme highlight, just so that it catches your eye, so that the sword really stands out and really does look like a magical sort of blended sword. Again, the paints are nice and thin, so as they dry, it's going to dry into a nice even blend, so it's not going to look too unnatural, it's not going to be too bright with just clumps of paint dried here and there. And the whole point and the whole idea is to just get as much of a nice blended transition as we possibly can. So we're just trying to glaze and use multiple layers to get these colours and these highlights to really stand out and really stick out to that weapon. It's all about the contrast I've found when painting this kind of technique, because the more contrast you can get out of the sword, getting those lights and darks and things like that, the more extreme and the more magical and the cooler that the sword will look. So as I said, we're going to do 2 just to make sure that we can get this to be something that can be easily replicated. So now that we've done it once, we should be a lot more confident in doing it the second time. And again, this is the cool thing with your bits box, is just try things with your bits box. Try to mix these paints, try different techniques. So for this one, I'm doing the same thing. We've started with our medium blue, as you can see. We've waited for that mid-tone to dry down. And this time, I'm just using a stippling effect instead. So I'm just dabbing now the dark bits, so the shaded area, into that check pattern either side, like we did earlier. Then we're going to go and do the same thing, but we're just going to do it with a lighter side. So we're adding another highlighted side on the opposite edges. And again, I'm doing this while the paints are still wet. So I'm blending these paints together, it doesn't matter. From what I've seen and from trying this technique, it's actually quite forgiving. Because you're blending those colours together, you don't need to be exact or precise, you don't need to worry about the highlights and the shades not mixing together or not touching each other. The whole idea of this is to blend those colours into that nice smooth transition. So if that means that you use multiple glazes, like we did with the first one where we were using really specific and strict sort of brush strokes, or instead this way round, if you're just stippling those colours together around those points like this, where those colours blend into each other, that's fine as well. Because the whole idea is that we're just blending and making that transition nice and smooth, nice and easy on the eye, not extreme highlights, extreme darks. And what we're doing is we're trying to make this nice and subtle and a nice smooth transition. So these nice thin colours and blending these thin colours together, or touching these thin colours together, is going to, as you can see, allow you to blend those colours naturally. So as you can see, that colour that we've just placed on the very tip there, that's going into the darker point, but it's mixed with the colour below. So as that dries, that's going to dry into a smoother transition. So again, we're not having blobs of thick, bright paint just sat on our sword, making our sword look a little bit strange. So this is something that like I say, when we did the non-metallic metal, that is very well worth practicing and trying and learning in a few different stages and a few different steps. It's worth trying out a few different types of swords as well, because some of the curved swords can be a little bit more difficult to do this. But the more you practice, the easier this becomes, and it becomes sort of like a second nature, you know, this blending these colours together. So keep practicing, try on your bits box, try on some of the swords that you're not going to use for your models, try to learn these different skills and techniques so that it gives you a little bit more sort of variation and variety to your painting, and something cool that you can try on different kinds of models as well. So I've waited now for all of those blends to dry down, and I'm just going to add another layer like we did with the other one. So I've blended the first major layer in, and then waited for this one then to dry down, just so that I could add a little bit more of the extreme, so a little bit more extreme highlight, as you can see, just bring that a little bit back up to gain that contrast between that light and dark as we were talking about earlier. From there, I think we can glaze those colours back and forth as well. So like I was saying, as you can see, the dark area to the mid-tone, it seems like a little bit of a rough transition, a bit too much of a transition. So we could blend that back in with a little bit of a mid-tone like so. And the more that we blend this in, and the more layers that we use to blend this in, the more natural and the nicer and smoother that transition becomes. And the more awesome and more sort of like magical the sword will look, as I said earlier. So just going to try and really blend these colours together. So there you go. Once that's all dried again, it's just time for those edge highlights and those little scrapes and scratches. So again, using the really bright highlight. Now, although I'm using the AK Interactive pastel blue, you don't have to use a pastel blue. You can use a white if you like, and just go for a really extreme sort of highlight. Or you can blend a little bit of the pastel blue from Vallejo into white, and give yourself that little bit of a more subtle highlight as well, and a nicer transition. So as you can see, sometimes if you place a little bit too much on your model, because the paints are nice and thin, it doesn't matter too much. You can move a little bit and manipulate them a little bit as well, and rub them off with your thumb or with a little bit of a wet brush or something like that. And then we're just going to use these little scrapes and scratches again, just these little magical sort of shimmers and things like that, just down the sword, and of course down the edges of the sword as well. And this is what's really going to finish the sword off. So the blend looks amazing and it looks incredible, but once you've got these little shimmers as well, it kind of finishes it off, and it just makes it look really complete and makes it look really nice. So all in all, magical swords and power swords and all these different things, they can seem really complicated. They seem daunting at first because you've got to blend your colours together. But actually, when you start doing it, it's a really fun little technique to do, and it's not something that you have to be scared of. It's something that you can really try and mix and blend and glaze those colours together. These are the two that I've done literally in about 10 minutes, just to show you sort of what you can do and how they can work, and I think they look pretty cool. So you have to let me know in the comments below what you think, and as always, my friends, I hope this helps you, and thank you so much for watching.